not because my ad sucks. It's because it's speaking to saying the wrong thing to this person at this time. I'm not speaking to this vast majority of people in the way that they want to be spoken to.
Hey, this episode is brought to you by OMG Commerce. That's the agency that I get the privilege of running. Do you ever feel like it's Groundhog Day when it comes to your marketing, where every day is the same, you're still relying on the same channels, got the same ads you're leaning into? Maybe it's time to diversify. Maybe it's time to unlock new growth. That's what we specialize in. My guess is, if you're like most brands, you're probably leaning heavily into Meta ads, and long live Meta, we love it. But you're probably missing YouTube ads. And my guess is maybe Google is under leveraged as well. We've helped multiple brands go from $0 to $5, $10, $15, even $25,000 a day. We helped Karenique, a hair regrowth product, go from $0 to $1 million in YouTube ad spend in 90 days while hitting their CAC target. And we'd love to see if we could do the same for you. So we'd love to chat, talk about what it takes to scale on YouTube and how ready you are right now. So let's chat. Go to omgcommerce.com, click the Let's Talk button, and we'd love to help you dominate with YouTube ads. Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of the E-Commerce Evolution Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Curry, CEO of OMG Commerce. And today, we've got a return guest. This guy is lighting up LinkedIn on the daily. You can hear him on all your favorite podcasts. If you're into marketing at all, and you've ever, tried to determine like how much should I be putting into performance versus brand, and is any of this real, and how do I measure it? Then this guy is like a beacon of light in our industry. And so excited to have him back on the podcast. But I've got the one, the only Preston Rutherford, co-founder of Chubbies. Looking good today, Preston. How's it going, man? And thanks for coming back on the pod.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about this a second ago, but I think my first go with you was my first ever podcast appearance. So thank you for just sort of getting me going. But now I'm excited to be here. This would be a lot of fun. Thank you for that glowing intro.
Yeah. You bet. Playing a very small part in your podcast career there. But yeah, I think it was the first. I was like, I was watching LinkedIn. I was like, hey, wait a minute. This guy's good. And it looks like maybe he's just kind of starting to post on LinkedIn. So I jumped on like, hey, come on the pod. And you did.
I love it.
And the rest is history, man. But I love what you and team built with Chubbies. I love how it's continued to succeed. And I want to talk about that a little bit in a minute, because it's such an important note to make. And then I think really the time is right. You've been talking about this for years. The time is right to be thinking about brand building and performance marketing, sustainable, profitable growth. It's just all kind of lining up. We had kind of the COVID era, rock and roll, crazy, hair on fire growth, where just grow, spend. We'll figure out profits later, to, oh shoot, we got to make money. We're not making any money. Now let's measure everything. And so I think we're coming to this place where it's like, okay, let's look at this holistically. And just so you know, like I've always felt like marketing has to drive some kind of action. It's got to drive some, like if we're advertising and people do nothing with that advertising, what are we doing? Mm-hmm. In fact, you'll appreciate this. My first little consultancy right out of college, I was working with local businesses. My tagline was marketing that builds your brand and your bottom line. And
love that.
I was trying to help like the local car dealership and local retail stores. It was super fun. But
love that.
I love how you guys have done this, that led to a 9-figure exit with Chubbies, and just your perspective here is really, really valuable. So maybe talk a little bit about the journey for those that don't know with Chubbies, kind of how you got to your current philosophy on marketing. And then we'll talk about kind of Chubbies' success right now, because it's kind of crazy how well it's doing right now. But tell us a little bit of the story.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a tiny part of the success. So one of 4 co-founders, and we started the business back in 2011. We were, 4 or 5 years out of college, just didn't want to work for other people more than anything, and just kind of we're looking for something to start. And kind of stumbled upon the shorter short, the whole vibe of let's be different, right? It was different from what was in vogue at the time from a men's, apparel perspective, right? Where it was very kind of like stuffy and, Abercrombie and Fitch shirts off, guys standing in front of the store spraying you with cologne, playing horrible, like, I don't know, German house music or whatever. Yeah. And you had to look a certain way, right? We're too cool for you. You can't hang with us. And there's like, that's the opposite of what we think should exist. So that was kind of like a foundational premise. And then the shorts were just like super, super long. And we all kind of grew up either playing soccer or rugby, or we were from the South, and all of those things, you're used to shorter shorts, right? Actual shorts. And then there was like a sort of like aspirational look back to our dads, on their spring breaks in college or when they were growing up, and how awesome that they looked with the mustaches and the shorter shorts and that whole thing. So all that kind of came together, and we're just like, well, shoot, let's just try to, we don't want to work for other people. It'd be fun to work together. Let's just try to start something. So that was back in 2011.
You guys helped. Were you like riding that trend, or do you feel like you kind of propelled that trend? Because there was a time, I'm a kid of the 90s. And so like we were like, with my basketball team in high school, we were coming off of like all the old uniforms from the 70s days were like super short, shockingly, almost obscenely short.
Exactly.
And then it was the Fab Five for Michigan. So everybody's going baggy shorts. That's like that was the rage.
Totally.
But now they're definitely short. Like that seems to be the trend. Did you guys like launch that trend back to short, or did you just kind of ride the wave that was already there? Or what's your perspective on that?
I mean, dude, this was 2011. So like, I'm obviously very biased, but like when we came out with shorter shorts, it was absurdly different,
I think you guys really propelled that. I think you did.
I think so. I think I definitely think so. And, it's one of those things that takes 15 years to really kind of like get going, right? It just takes a long time. But no, we were like starkly different. And I think that was one of the main reasons why we were able to stand out, because there was that latent demand of people who, it was like, sometimes there were shorter folks who like had to cut the shorts that they had. They had to go to like Savers or Goodwill, and they had to find older shorts. Or there were folks who, generally maybe they had bigger quads or something like that, and they wanted to show them off. Or you had folks who played sports and just kind of wanted a better short that just kind of fit with what they were used to. There are all these sorts of things where there was like latent demand. And so there was like this niche of people who were down with it, but like broadly, it was like very frowned upon and viewed as like stupid and less masculine, like all of this kind of stuff. So we just tried to like turn the tables and did all of these things where like from a brand and positioning perspective, made it seem completely, our goal at least was to make it completely inarguable that shorts were meant to be short. And that if you were scared to show off your actual legs, maybe that was representative of a lack of confidence, or that you're hiding something, or that like what's in those pockets of those cargo shorts. So all of these sorts of things.
Great.
But it was very rare at the time. It certainly wasn't a trend that existed in a big way.
Totally makes sense. So yeah, I'm going to credit you guys with that for sure. So you decide you don't want to work with people, or you want to work for yourselves. You want something that's not the stuffy kind of will tell you how to be cool type of thing, like Abercrombie and Fitch and stuff like that. So you launched the brand, like then pick us up from there.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, at the beginning, it was like we had no money, right? And the first person that we went to work with to actually make some shorts for us just like took our money. So it wasn't a blazing start, I guess I would say. But, we kind of funded the early days with pre-sales, like we were just trying to get emails, sign people up, or we were doing like straight up like in-person sales, like we'd do events at bars, or we'd sell shorts at the park, like very hand-to-hand combat sort of thing that I think I highly recommend for anyone who's just like starting a brand, sell stuff in person. But then like, started to get some early success and I think started to grow a little bit, which was like, the early goal. And, it was the time of, Facebook ads were just becoming a thing, right? And you could spend $1, get 10 out, or whatever the exorbitant number was at the time.
Numbers, yeah.
And you just start to feel this godlike power that, right? I mean, you can't necessarily like cure cancer, but you can sell shorts on the internet and
You
put
can
$1 in and get 10
create
out.
profits at will. Yeah, it was kind of
pretty
like the
hard
very
to
early
do.
days of Google where you were literally getting like 5 and 10 cent clicks. It's like
Right.
you could literally print money. And then those were such unique times that great to take advantage of that. It's never going to, last forever. And so that's kind of
Well, we didn't. That's the thing. We didn't know that, right? I mean, it's hard to know that because you're like, why would this stop? I don't understand like the macro dynamics. So like we basically got obsessed with that kind of thing, right? Just like, following the trend of what works, right? What drives that 10x ROAS or whatever, right? And so I think we were growing, and I think because we were just so new, we were doing the brand building thing because we just knew that was the way to differentiate. And we couldn't spend like 30% of revenue on marketing. So we had to like do crazy stuff that was free. So that kind of like did the brand building stuff in the early days. But then as we started to get more of a flow and we needed more consistency, and predictability, that's when we just kind of over rotated into just like the pure demand capture, right? I mean, because there was this latent demand for, fun apparel, short kind of thing. And we were just capturing that, right? So we didn't feel the pain because we didn't need to create new demand for our brand, for our product until we needed to. And then that was less fun. That was about halfway in. And so we kind of like hit a little bit of a midlife crisis, if you will. But then that's kind of like where we had to rebuild the business from the ground up. Again, like all the credit to the team, all the credit to the other founders here. I'm just a tiny, tiny part. I just talk about it on the internet, but I was generally the one who was representative of all of bad decision making. And it was the other founders who were more representative of like, no, let's build this thing for the long term. Let's find balance, right? And so then we had to like learn what demand creation, demand capture, what that balance looks like, how to measure it, how to think about it, how to allocate that capital. But ultimately it resulted in a great, you mentioned, all I can share is a 9-figure acquisition. But now we're going on 8 years of top and bottom line growth. I'm not in the business anymore, but Rainer, one of the 4 co-founders, and the exceptional team. They're
great guy, great
going
team,
out and absolutely crushing it. It's awesome.
Yeah. It really speaks to what you guys built in the early days, and to see that sustained growth means that you got a lot of it right. You got product right, you got team right, you got the approach to brand building and performance marketing, you got that mix right. And so I want to dive in here a little bit. One of the things you talk about a lot online, and that you and I have talked about one-to-one, is had this idea of like the performance trap and brand erosion, which I know is kind of the trap you guys fell into when you thought the 10-to-1 ROAS was going to go on forever and ever, and then it didn't. And then you're like, oh shoot, what do we do now? How to kind of rebuild things. But talk about that a little bit. What is that performance trap and brand erosion? How does a brand know they're in it? And then we'll talk about how do you get out of it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's that feeling, you feel it in your gut where you're just like, this can't be right. This doesn't feel like this is what leads to like a long-term generational sort of thing, right? You kind of like look back at your actions and you're like, am I truly like building desirability for my brand, kind of thing? Or am I just making all of these withdrawals without making any deposits, if you want to use like the bank account metaphor analogy? But then it shows up in the data too, right? I mean, people will cite a variety of stats like my CAC is going, my customer acquisition cost is going up, or my CPMs are going up, or my reach is going down, cost per 1,000 accounts reached going down, or contribution margins going down. I ran a sale this year, I ran the same sale last year, and the lift from the sale this year was like 50% of what I got last year.
Right.
So next year I'm going to have to double the discount. Or the only way I can scale spend on XYZ channel is if there's like a really strong offer now, and I can't just like talk about my product. I've got to throw an offer on it. And all of these sorts of things where you just kind of look at the business and you're like, man, do I feel like I'm in a more defensible position, or do I feel more reliant on the ad platforms? Like, am I getting as much of my revenue from people searching for my brand name and coming to my site and buying as I am from like a click on a buy button on an ad? You start to realize that probably the answer is like no to that, right? That part of, let's call it, I don't want to call it like organic demand or unpaid demand, but just the purchase behaviors that were driving the mix of that over time can start to get a little bit more over-indexed onto the let's fight for clicks and get the click kind of thing, you kind of get into a place where you're like, well, shoot, my ROAS is like whatever the number is. And it's, I've been able to grow it, but like, has my business grown? You know, and you start to see those like disconnect between like these metrics that we use to evaluate how we spend our money and the actual business. And you start to get into these like perverse incentive situations where you're like, okay, I've got to be at like a marketing efficiency ratio of like a 5 or something like that. Great. And then I need to maximize ROAS within that context. Great. Okay. And I need to get like a blended 5 on that. So you're like, oh, okay, well, I could just like remove some audience exclusions and that will help me, you know, get a little bit of a higher ROAS. I could retarget a little bit more. I could spend a little bit more on brand keywords. You know, you can do all these things where you're just like, well, no, we need to capture that demand. We need to make sure we're defending our brand. You know, we need to make sure we're doing X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. The meta algorithm will handle it or whatever. And we can get into these like slippery slopes where it's like, but maybe I'm just claiming credit for a lot of transactions that would have already happened. Yeah. So anyways, there's this whole cycle where it's like, okay, well, we're spending more to get less. I'm discounting more. Now I'm more and more competing on the level of like features and price rather than just like who I am as a brand. But it ultimately manifests generally in contribution dollars going down or contribution margin going down, right? Just like the cash flowing through the business, even if revenue's going up, the cash actually dropping to cover your fixed costs, you're not looking as good as you would generally like it to look. Right. And if you trend that out 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you know, it's no bueno kind of thing.
Yeah. But you see where we're headed in the wrong direction. Sometimes as ROAS climbs, or often as ROAS climbs, your overall contribution margin may be going down, and the incremental impact, incremental lift of your marketing dollars often going down as well, meaning we're making ourselves feel good by looking in the ad account and patting ourselves on the back with great ROAS numbers. But ultimately, we're not driving new customers at an acceptable cost. We're not fueling organic growth. We're not actually driving the brand to grow. And that is absolutely no bueno.
How did you guys, like, what were the warning signs for you? Like super quickly, like 2 points of nuance on that. Like we were mentioning like CAC and like customer acquisition. Like I got to hit my new customer count, right? So then one of the things that you do kind of like as a last ditch effort, or it just continues and you don't stop it, but it's like bring them in with these big promos, right? And you're like, I hit my new customer goal, right? I crushed it on new customers. Right. And then you look back 6 months later and you're like, wow, that cohort's LTV is horrible. Is horrible. And I'm predicting
some of my worst customers that I've ever had right there.
Yeah. I'm requiring so much revenue from that cohort to just like float my business, and it's not manifesting. Like that's doom spiral land. You know what I mean? And so that's one other thing where you're just like, oh wow, okay, I'm predicting an LTV to CAC, and now that's like not a real number at all because of how I've driven so much new customer acquisition through just like buy now promo 15 minutes rather than I freaking love this brand, I'm going to buy from them. That being nuance number one, where it's like, okay, it's not just about hitting your new customer count goals. It matters, but it's like how we get them in. Number two is maybe more of like a subjective thing where like, I kind of think about it as like being the wacky wavy inflatable tube man kind of blow up mascot at used car dealerships where it's like, that kind of like being the typical, or even like the sleazy used car salesperson where it's just like, okay, you know, we're going to use all the tactics. You know, that's the whole idea. Like you look at, if I'm just going to be putting out like 10 million impressions, of those 10 million impressions, how many of those impressions are with creative that is like, freaking buy right now. Here's a problem you have. Here's my solution. Here are the top features. And here's 50% off if you buy right now. Versus I'm just going to make you laugh. And it's going to tie back to what I do and who I am. But that builds the brand. That builds the desirability. That preps the 95% that I know we're going to talk about. You pick your head up as a founder, as a marketer, as a whoever, and you're like, I don't like how this mix has shifted. You know, is this how I'm presenting myself to the world? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And that is one of those humbling things where you're just like, oh crap. Like regardless of what any metric says, that just is not right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If all we are at the end of the day is a feeling that gets someone to take an action to stop them from buying the incumbent who's currently meeting their need for what I'm trying to do, that's the thing where you're just like, I think I got to change. So those are two nuances on that front.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll share a quick story. When I was right out of college, I was doing some consulting with local businesses and met this piano dealer. Great guy, loved him. But they found out that the only success they were really having was these going out of business sales. And so they would they would sign up to acquire this distressed piano dealer, and then they would just do a liquidation sale.
Oh my God.
They got so addicted to it. They're like, we just got to go out of business every month. That's they have these distressed inventory sales every month. And that's legitimately what they did. So they would start we've got this distressed inventory from this dealership in Illinois. It has to go today. And that's all they could get to work. So it's we're going out of business every month. That's our strategy. And that's an extreme example, but
totally.
This discount spiral, that's what some D2C brands can get into as well, where it's I can only exist if I give these deep discounts and dial up the urgency to 11, then I can make money. Otherwise I can't. And it's I like this brand building where you're still creating desire. You're still making people say, I kind of want that. I want those shorts, or I want that look, but it's not the same, buy now, limited inventory, going out of business type of thing. It's just a totally different approach.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we could talk tactics and positioning all day, but the going out of sale thing and only doing that over and over is just classic.
It's just, it's the perfect picture there of the trap we can get into for sure.
Everyone can imagine the sign. You can imagine what the ad looks like on local TV, right? Because we've all seen it before.
I kind of joked too. I was like, we need to start running ads where we're still going out of business. It's just, we're going out of business again. Yeah. Anyway, so pretty funny. Today's episode is sponsored by Postpilot. It's the secret weapon behind some of your favorite e-commerce brands, and they're using it to print money on the regular. So if you're already crushing it with Klaviyo, with Meta, then imagine taking that same segmentation and automation and sending it straight to your customers' mailboxes. That's right. We're talking physical mail, personalized postcards that drive serious, trackable revenue. And right now, Postpilot's giving e-commerce Evolution podcast listeners 1,000 free postcard credits just to test it out. But this is for new users only. Just go to postpilot.com and tell them that we sent you to claim your credits. Break through that digital noise and beat rising ad costs. That's direct mail done right. Postpilot.com. Well, let's talk about this shift that you had where you talk about your 95-5 rule. And I think part of the point that you've been making, and I've been making for years, is a lot of our businesses have succeeded off of just capturing existing demand. Not a bad thing. We got to have demand capture and demand generation. You got to have those balanced and the right mix and whatnot. But talk about the 95-5 rule. What is that? How do you use that to approach healthy growth?
Yeah. And this is it's not, I wish it were mine. I think it comes from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, which, I would definitely look them up, and John Dawes and Byron Sharp, and the book, How Brands Grow, all this good stuff, right? Talking about mental availability, physical availability, gets into some marketing-y, science-y stuff, which kind of makes me gloss over personally, which is why I try to make this stuff a little bit more fun. But the general idea is and I didn't know about this until more recently. So I felt it. It felt like a jumble of pain and anxiety in my soul when I was actually running the media myself and in the trenches operating. But it's the general idea that 95% of our audience at any given time is not actively shopping for my category. So the so what there is two things. One, if I'm spending 95 or 100% of my marketing dollars, where the goal or the outcome of success is I convince you to purchase, there's this massive mismatch, right? And this is how I think we were for a long time at Chubbies. We were spending 95% of our dollars going to demand capture, rational appeal, product offer urgency. I'm going to get you right now, right? And a better ad is just an ad that is more convincing, right? But but we were only hitting that 5-ish% of people, like the vast minority, whether it's 95.5 or 85, whatever the number is, there's
Right.
that. And then the other idea simply being the creative that crushes it for the 5%, just goes in one ear and out the other for the 95%, right? Because they're not actively shopping, right? So it's kind of like, if you've heard of the term like reticular activation or reticular activation, where it's like,
that.
okay, I want a red Ferrari. So then I see red Ferraris freaking everywhere kind of thing.
Yep.
Where if it's not that, you just don't see it, right? You don't even see it. So I'm just like, if I'm only evaluating my creative, my media, whatever it is, by how I'm capturing that demand, my job with the 95 is to prep them. It's like generate a memory, generate a feeling, get someone to say, I freaking love that ad when XYZ happens with that brand. Like one of my favorite ads of all time that just maybe hit me at a great time. I don't know. It was like the classic Dollar Shave Club ad, right? That YouTube ad was just like so epic and
funny,
so memorable.
You had
I
to
could
watch
talk
it.
about it. It was like easy to refer to, watch it multiple times. And, I'd like to think Chubbies made a bunch of those as well. And I think we did, but like from another brand and just going way back, that was one that just True Classic's first big video ad, I think was freaking awesome. Like the guys sitting in the office with the boss, right? It's just like such a memorable scene where just like that captures what we're all about. And I remember it. And there's countless examples, right? But I'm just kind of thinking about more like modern brands. And that probably did a really good, both of those probably did a really good job at capturing demand, right? You're like, that's freaking awesome. Because these are like unicorn piece of creative, right?
Yep.
But it did a much better job at just like prepping all of these people who are like, I don't need a Razor subscription today, kind of thing, but like I will. Or I don't need a bunch of t-shirts today because I just bought some crappy Hanes on, at Macy's or whatever, but I will when my wife says, you look ugly, right? And I'm going to think True Classic. So I think those are the things where if it was just like 20% off, product shop, white background, buy now, that'd be total wasted money. I think that's the kind of general idea was like that totally floored me. It was like, oh my gosh, it's not because my ad sucks. It's because it's speaking to saying the wrong thing to this person at this time. I'm not speaking to this vast majority of people in the way that they want to be spoken to, right? My job there is to prep, to drive that emotion. Whereas with the 5% or whatever the number is, right? Rational appeal, be as efficient as possible, right? You've got to your point, you got to balance that. We call it brand and monetization, right? You build that brand, build that mental availability, build whatever, but then you got to like clear that funnel like the best of them. And many of us are good at that, right? The thing we're not doing is like filling the funnel or building the desirability, but like it's not the whole idea here is just to add balance because many modern brands they've gotten out of balance and it makes sense, right? Because the data that we now have access to makes us feel like we are media gods and that's all there is. And that's capital T truth. But I think everyone kind of learns when you start to feel this, and everyone feels this, and you earn this problem, right? Because this means you've gotten to this place. And you've stayed in business long enough to kind of have this, well, is this the ceiling for my brand? Or why am I spending more to get all of these sorts of things? So you earn this problem. It's a great problem to have. Yeah. But it's just like a classic what got us here won't get us there sort of situation. And it's like, okay, reset. What does balance look like for us now? How do we get to that next stage of growth?
Yeah, and I would love to hear your perspective on this. I've got a couple of thoughts myself, but like, how do we find that right mix of demand capture and demand generation? I do agree with you that most modern brands are better at the demand capture piece, right? Whether that's through Meta or Google or likely a combination of the two. But how do we find that right mix of brand or demand generation, demand capture? How do you view that?
Mm-hmm. Totally. I mean, I think what we learned so the Chubbies example, for instance, I would say we're like at 95.5 in favor of performance, right? 5% was just the slush fund. You know what I mean? That just like would get cut if you miss a number on a month kind of thing. And I was like, okay, great. Nice to have. Like, I don't have any metrics against it, blah, blah, blah. And then I think where we evolved over time, it's like after the midlife crisis, let's say 2-3 years after that. And again, buckets are tough, right? So just say this is brand and this is DR and blah, 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 right? It's like a channel tactic creative kind of thing, right? What's the job to be done? So we can have that conversation, but broadly, just to give numbers, it got close-ish to like that 60-40, right? The classic brand, 60% to brand, 40% to activation. And it's not just on the paid side too, right? Because like we've got email. Email is a freaking awesome way to capture demand.
Workhorse.
And I'm not paying that much for it, right? So what we did a lot, and SMS too. So like what we did a lot of was like, let's also view that as our demand capture engine as well.
Yes.
And not only use paid for bottom funnel demand capture, right? Because that can just, and it's a math problem, right? But like, what is the cheapest way to get you to exit my funnel is kind of like a part of the way to think about it. But yeah, man. And that freaks people out, right? Because no one is at 50-50. No one's even at 40% to brand. No one's even, I mean, maybe if you're like Clorox or whatever, right? But like if we're talking modern brands, that freaks people out. They think lack of accountability, lack of measurement. They think lighting money on fire. So what I'm like the easier answer and what I think is like a productive answer is just more. More to brand building, more to demand gen.
Agree.
Like you're so far from having a conversation where like, is this too much brand building? Most of us are like sub 10%. So like if it's 10, get to 11. If it's 11, get to 12%. Like find a way to inch that up and just test maniacally. And we can talk about what we're testing and how we measure. But I think one of the big things is that there's this humbling reality that for many brands, if you just take the 10% least efficient spend on DR, well, first of all, you got to do those tests to find what the 10% least efficient is, right? Most brands are just like, no, this is my bread and butter. It works. And if you ask them like, how well does it work? Like if you were to cut spend 10%, what would happen? If you were to pulse spend up 30% in a week, what would happen? Like, would you see 30% more growth? No, I've not done that. We can't do those tests. No. Or you explain it away in a variety of different ways. So I think the first part there is like, let's get to a little bit more precision on the level of incrementality of if we're spending 95% on performance. And the thing, like the bread and butter, like our top spending ad sets, right? Let's like pressure test the hell out of that first. And that kind of opens up the conversation, right? Because the whole reason why there's a debate about the split of brand and performance is because there's a fear that you'll waste money if you put it towards brand. But the reality is that most brands, not all, are already wasting way more money because they're not pressure testing their existing performance spend. They don't have a testing framework. They're testing, and I love House. I think they're the coolest. I love Measured. I think all incrementality testing is amazing. However, what I would encourage, and I'm sure they encourage the same, is like, let's test some of our bigger, like closer held assumptions rather than these little ticky-tack micro optimizations on the margin that you're like, oh, was trying a view content, versus an add to cart. Like, is that gonna, sure, maybe there's something there, but like, what about my bread and butter kind of thing? These are the things that I kind of encourage, like us to get a better feel for the incrementality of, because that's more fundamental, right? And that's like where we could basically say, if I'm spending $100 million a year on XYZ, I can free up $15 million because it's really not doing anything for me, or like the marginal contribution dollar generation on that 15 million is like so low that either I could not spend it or I could just put it to demand gen, but there would be no downside to that in my business. I think that's kind of like step one in a lot of these situations. We're just like, let's get a little bit of humility around where all of the money's going, right? To acknowledge that we're probably like wasting quite a bit of money there. So then that takes the conversation away from the fear being wasting money. And then it can be a conversation around different things like, how are we going to build brand? How are we going to measure it? Yes, I agree. Having more demand makes sense. So then what are we going to do about it? But it's like, let's make it as inarguable as possible and less of this. I know I'm not wasting money on performance. I'm taking a massive flyer, a massive risk of wasting money on brand. That's a fundamentally flawed premise that I think we need to get alignment on first before we then talk about what the ideal split should be. So it's kind of like those two things. It should be more. And then we're already wasting way more money on our like bottom funnel demand capture kind of stuff. So like, let's acknowledge those things. And then I think we can have productive conversations going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a great point. And I think that first piece we've got to key in on. Whatever you're doing now to build your brand, to drive demand rather than just to capture it, you got to start testing, doing more of it. And yes, we would love to get to a point with our marketing where we've got 0% waste. Probably never going to happen.
Nope.
And it's certainly not happening now, even if you think you're measuring all of your marketing the way that you should be. And so I do credit House. I'm glad you brought them up. I'm a big YouTube guy, and so they've done a lot for us where they this huge YouTube incrementality test and showed that, man, you look at YouTube performance in platform, the actual incremental impact is probably almost 3.5 times that. And so really showing like, hey, the way you're measuring it, what you should be thinking about is this driving accretive growth or incremental growth or growth I wouldn't have already had? And there's some challenges there, right? But I love the way you frame that. And I would be curious, how do you look at maybe some of those initial tests or initial looks at how do we understand how incremental this activity is? Because there are some tools out there. Some of them are really quite expensive, and House is probably in that bucket for a lot of brands. How do you start to test incrementality? What did you guys do? What do you recommend that people do?
Great question. And the thing about like the YouTube findings with House, what we're seeing with Marathon, which is just effectively just trying to measure the longer term stuff, is that it's even more pronounced. So like, I think House is helping us understand the short term impact of YouTube and a variety of tactics on YouTube, which is stronger than shows in platform. But then the longer term impact we're also seeing is like also pretty massive. So it's like generally people are sleeping on YouTube, I guess is my point, both from the short and the long term perspective. And it backs out like to a rational first principles perspective. You're like, at the end of the day, seconds of focused attention is the thing, that within. And so that's why TV has been a thing for so long, right? Because it's like the switching costs are really high. Some of the best,
the most iconic brands were often built on TV, right? And YouTube is our version of TV. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And with YouTube, I don't know what it is, like 50% of impressions are on a TV.
Exactly.
I don't know the exact number, right? But I think
it's like between 50 and 60%. Yeah, it's growing. TV's growing.
So I don't know where else you get those seconds of focused attention as cleanly and efficiently and effectively as on YouTube. So anyways, that's one note that I wanted to mention. But like in terms of like the how do we start to think about incrementality testing? So there's like the poor person, let's call it the duct tape solution kind of thing. I was going to say poor man's solution, but like let's call it like bubblegum duct tape. And then there's like let's do it right. But then broadly philosophy, like philosophy on measurement. And obviously I'm biased because I started the measurement software company, but like this is why. It's because I think brands underinvest in measurement, right? If we're going to spend in aggregate, let's call it, I don't know what the number is, 1% of our marketing budget's on measurement. Like you just say it like that rather than thinking about it as a fixed cost and I've got like a broad software budget.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, okay, that's like, is that a good investment? No, you think about it like percentage of marketing spend. I'm like, do I think I can get more than a 1% improvement in the results from my marketing spend as a result of spending on measurement? The answer is yes, because from my experience, right, you're wasting way more than that not knowing some of these answers. Totally. So like I highly recommend, yes, use all platform tools, but then have your MTA tool, have your incrementality tool, have your MMM tool. And then why we're building Marathon, have your long-term, have your precise performance brand stuff too, which was a big missing piece. It was why we're trying to attack it. But like invest more, don't short shrift the measurement stuff. And even if I know you were on the Marketing Operators podcast recently, if you think back on one of their older episodes was when like times were maybe a little bit tougher and they were talking about like, what do we cut and what do we not cut? And I think Cody from Ridge made a good point where he was just like, thing you do not cut is marketing software. You just don't cut that, right? Because that's marketing measurement software. Sorry, because that's the North Star. If you're flying blind, it's our marketing spend is our biggest cost in this business. So if it's not guided by anything, right, that's really, really bad, right? You can get really upside down on your economics. So that's like a broad philosophical thing. It's like, whatever you're investing in measurement software now, invest more. And then obviously use it, right? Prioritize use of it, right? Because you can have an account with name your tool. And if you don't spend time on it, right, you're going to waste money. But like, so essential. Something like how, like if you're wanting to just like try some tests now, first it's a mindset shift outside of like, I need to use measurement software and that's really important, or measurement tools, let's call it. If you're not going to, regardless of how you're going to test, you need to commit to like, this is not going to change my business tonight, right? This is an evolution in how we operate, right? So let's think about what each test for the next 12 months looks like. Let's plan it out and let's commit to it, right? And let's allocate enough budget to it. And let's just know that it's more about information gathering, like neutral information gathering, than like test if that's a failure or not.
Right.
And that's like a different way to approach it. So that being number one. But like I would start with some of our like core things. Like if you think about like an ad set where you spend your most dollars, like let's pressure test that. Let's like cut that 30%, cut that 40% for a week, see what happens.
Or
Pulse it up
exclude
100%.
a few geos if you can, and kind of measure those geos if you're set up to do that.
Yeah. So then we can talk about that. So the pulse up and down, just do that to everything and cycle through that, right? I mean, starting with the specific strategies that you're spending the most on at any given time, right? Because like the other thing is like the result from a May test doesn't necessarily apply next May, might not even apply to December, right? These are moment in time tests kind of thing, which is fine, right? It's that doesn't make it bad. It's just like, we tried that 2 years ago and it didn't work, so we're not going to try it ever again. We don't want that stuff to happen because things change, economics change, auctions change, ad products change, our brand changes, our creative changes. So that like, but just cycle through. Like if I'm going to test and just work down from the things that I'm spending the most on, pulse up, pulse down is a great way to do it. To your point on holdouts are great. We've built like the long-term brand version of it at Marathon, house measured, name your tool. They've got amazing tools. Some people run them themselves and that's okay, but I caution because you can do it wrong. And then if you don't understand like the level of statistical significance, or if you don't like all of these, it's like, it's a statistical exploration, right? It's less like I tested Texas and Texas grew faster than the rest of country. It's like, no, like that's because like Texas behaves different from rest of country for a variety of reasons. It's got a different seasonality curve, right? You went into that month with different numbers. And so it's like, you can very easily, be steered in the wrong way. And so I've made this mistake personally because I would just like, let's just Texas, California, New York. Let's just do it there. Boom. That's our test. I'd say that's, I don't know. I don't know if that's better than nothing, to be honest. Like to the extent you can get down to like a DMA level,
right,
and do it in that way, or even a zip level, I think that's better. But regardless, you got to spend more and you got to run it for longer, generally, right? I mean, I think people want answers today, tomorrow, and you want to spend as little as possible. But, and that's why I think these tools are clear on like how confident are we in these solutions, or what is the variability of potential outcomes here? Like I'm showing you some number, right? But that's not the number. You know, that's not the iROAS. That's not the specific. There's a range of outcomes. And I would always just caution, like double click on what that number is, what the range of outcomes is, what the error, like how, like, are you happy with this outcome? Are we happy with this outcome kind of thing? Because it could be something like that, especially if, you know, we cut the test off early or whatever. But, so the way you set this up, the way you run the test, just counter the short-termism that we as humans are fully laden with, and know that like, it's just a systematic thing. You got to give it enough time. You got to run it correctly. But like the pulse up, pulse down, and just understand like, okay, I added a marginal 20%. What did I get? And do that over and over and over and over, right? Because you're always going to have variables. You're going to have like a good product launch on the next week, and you're going to have a bad product launch next week. And email will toss. So that's why you got to like do it multiple times as well. It's not just like a one and done thing. It's like broadly, I'm committed to learning this set of things this year. I'm not going to boil the ocean, because like you look back and you're just like, oh, even if you think about running a test that maybe is a little bit longer, you're like, oh my God, that's an eternity. But then it's like, it takes you 10 to 15 years to get to any like real material scale and profit generation anyway. So you're like, you're not going to spend a month testing what could be like something that changes your bit, like changes the way you spend 30% of your marketing dollars. It's again, I would felt this exact thing, right? And I was the one who was like, no, we can't test that stuff. Like, we got to go. We got to go. We got to go. We got to go. So I'm the guilty guy here. So I've felt all of these things, but those are just some thoughts as it relates to like how to do tests.
Yeah, man, it's so valuable and so much to unpack there. I want to talk a little bit about kind of your measurement stack, and then I want to really dive into what marathon data is measuring and how that fits into the overall stack. But I'll give kind of a quick analogy here that I think will help. And you talk about how like running one test is silly. Like you got to run multiple tests, right? So there's heart issues in my family, at least with a few people. And it's like I'm diving into some of this, right? And so you can measure your resting heart rate, and my resting heart rate is really good, right? You can then measure heart rate variability and like how that speaks to the health of your heart. You can also then do like lipid panels and see like what's my cholesterol like, but not just cholesterol, but there's like 20 ways to measure cholesterol. And then it's like, well, I need to measure that probably 3 or 4 or 5 times throughout the year, because if you measure once, it could be based on some other factors, right? And so then you're like, well, maybe I need to like do a calcium check and all of these things. But if you want to say like, I want to be healthier or I want to build for the long term with my health, you're going to have to measure all of those things, understand what they're measuring, understanding then based on the reading, what do you do with that? And then measure on an ongoing basis, right? Which kind of feels a little bit overwhelming, but that's just the way it is. And I feel like it's the same with marketing, right? We can't run one test and be like, great, we know what to do forever now with our marketing, right? Or this is the salvation for our brand. We have MTA now, multi-touch attribution. Everything is solved. It's never the case, right? It's like we've got to stack these things. We have to understand what they're measuring, what that's telling us, what we expect, and then what do we do with it? And so kind of talk about that. What do you believe is like your perfect marketing measurement stack? And then let's go deep on marathon data.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think broadly, there's before you even start talking about marketing measurement stack, there's like a bit of like, these things are true and like, you can't really argue them.
Yeah.
And maybe this applies to the whole conversation, but where it's just like, most likely, if you're running into a little bit of this with like, I'm spending more, getting less, or CAC's up, or blah, 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 like you just reached that stage where it's like, maybe we got to change. I think we tend to jump to like, oh, it's like conversion rate optimization, or I need more creative diversity, or blah, 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 blah. But I'm like, those are symptoms rather than the cause. So like, I think part of it is like, let's get to the cause and let's understand that most likely it's that we've just eaten through most of the people who know about us, care about us, or thinking about us, right? Like that's very rational. And I think we need alignment on that first. Great. Now let's talk about measurement stack. And that's more specific. But I do think that there's a nice multi-touch attribution tool. Awesome. A lot of people don't know that like GA has that.
It does.
Right. So you can get it in a variety of different places. And then some kind of experimentation platform, right? To just test something. And so we all, I think, know the great vendors there. Some kind of statistical analysis tool, right? Like an MMM of sorts, where you can just like put a lot of data in and get an understanding of what's doing what. And it's not susceptible to the cookie apocalypse, to the iOS 14, to the blah, blah, blah. Yep. It's just stats, right? So that's what I would view as like, just like, and I think all of the ad platforms put out papers where they talk about like, that's the trinity of measurement, right? It's MTA, it's testing, it's MMM, all of that together, right? You triangulate. And then in my strong opinion, we need to understand like how we're building the long-term compounding value, right? Like how are we going to over time make sure we get more and more of our revenue coming from people searching for our brand, coming direct to our site, right? Where it's not fighting in that auction all day, every day to get that click. And so I think that's maybe the segue to Marathon, but definitely like all of them. And I recommend that if you're spending, I don't know, more than $1 million a year or something like that on marketing, right? So effectively every brand to have like a full measurement stack.
Gotta have it. And I think that's one of the flaws that people are kind of coming to understand is like MTA alone won't solve it, right? It's good to see kind of click data and clickstream data and kind of what are people doing after they see an ad. It gives you some insight, but you need that MMM that shows correlation, right? When spend goes up on TV or YouTube, what happens to sales? If there's no correlation, there's no causation. And then you gotta run experiments to see like, okay, but is there causation? Is it just correlation? Mm-hmm. Is there not? Is there causation? Totally. So all those things work together.
Yeah.
I think
the other thing though, like the one point that I think might be helpful, and I know we're short on time, but I think this might be helpful is like the MTA or even like the in platforms, we think like they know all of the clicks and they know all of the purchases. Like, and that's like deterministic, quote unquote. Yeah. Whereas like models are probabilistic and therefore less trustworthy. The reality is 85% of people are opting out of tracking on iPhones. Yes. A lot of our customers are iPhone users. You hover over the little I in Ads Manager when you're looking at data and it says, this data is modeled.
Yep.
So even the click-based ROAS, which we think is like the highest, like we switched from 7-day click, 1-day view down to like 1-day click because we're accountable. And then like the reality is that the vast majority of this data is modeled because there's so much data loss, right? So like there are often questions around, okay, I view what's in platform as capital T truth, right? Because you've got all of the clicks, you know what everyone did. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunately bullshit. And so I think the more we realize that, the flaw of this, just from that perspective, not in terms of like all of the other negative implications that it has on us in terms of like optimizing just for short term and just like getting into this doom spiral, but like of the fact that like that data is modeled, heavily modeled. Yes. I don't know how much, I don't know the specifics, but just like hover over the little I in Ads Manager and it'll tell you, and then look at the data. Like the vast majority of people are opting out of being tracked on their phones. And I don't know what the number is, but like 70 to 80% of sessions are on mobile for many of our brands, for many of our D2C contexts. I don't know what the number is for Amazon, right? But it's like, it's all modeled and that's okay.
Yes.
You know,
it's okay.
So let's not poo-poo statistical analysis. Let's not poo-poo all of this stuff that we tend to poo-poo because all of it's modeled.
Great point. Love that. And it's only going to become more and more true, right? There's going to be less and less clarity. There's going to be more and more privacy that's kind of part of this. But we can then still triangulate and understand, okay, when we're doing these things, it leads to this kind of business outcome that I'm looking for. And so kind of walk through and I'm fine on time actually, just to kind of clarify that. But what's the thesis behind Marathon data? What problem are you solving? And kind of talk to us about how that works.
Totally. Well, it starts with this realization that brand is important. Brand is the moat. Brand is the thing that protects our ability to generate profits over time, protects us from competition, protects us from someone who's willing to come in and try to steal my customers because they can spend twice as much as I can, or some brand from name your country who just straight up copies my product and tries to sell it for half price, which has happened to, I think, many of the listeners of this podcast, ourselves included.
Yep.
What then do we have? How then do we continue to have people come to our site and pay twice as much for our thing? You know what I mean? Or keep coming to us and not need to only buy on a discount or whatever, like selling our souls. That being important and that being something that tends to happen to every brand as they reach some level of success. I don't know what the annual revenue is, but this general idea that like brand is important. Brand is ultimately the most important thing for many of us consumer brands, unless we have some patent, some other IP. Brand ends up being that IP if we're just selling consumer goods. So, okay, that being said, it's been really hard to measure that so that we can connect that to actual revenue growth historically, right? The way it's historically been done, right, is surveys, brand tracker surveys. Like, let's get our brand awareness number. Two problems with that, right, is that you've got this intermediary metric. First of all, it took like 3 months to get that metric, right? So you're already like, okay, what is this what is, okay, my brand awareness went up 5 points, but what period of time are we even looking at? I don't even remember. I'm thinking about Black Friday, Cyber Monday, right? The so what? There are two so whats that are unanswered, right? What did I do to get that? And then how much more money am I making because of that? So we're intending to kind of get out of surveys, focus on actions, like you're mentioning, right? Everything I do should drive an action.
Yes.
So behaviors, what people do rather than what people say. There's a crap ton of that being generated every day on the internet, right? So use behavior and then solve the two so whats that have been the pernicious problems with measuring the impact of brand. One is like tie it to action as much as you can, not everything, but as much as you can, tie it to actions you've taken. Give yourself like a daily number that is in the form of dollars, which is solving the second so what, which is like, how do I quantify or predict or look back and analyze the incremental revenue impact of this brand building stuff? Like actually make that connection. And so those are the two things we're trying to do with brand. And so like, think of us as like, all of the things I was talking about on the short term kind of stuff, but for long term. So our whole focus is like not the clicks, not the short term purchases, but what's happening over the next 6 months. How can we think about building that banked revenue, if you will, that future revenue that I'm going to be building into and realizing. But then also, how am I driving what we focus on, which is called resilient baseline revenue, right? So even as you look at an MMM readout, for instance, of our short-term stuff, you'll always get like some percentage of the revenue that wasn't explained necessarily by your short-term tactics. It was the base sales, right? The sales you would have gotten anyways is kind of another way to talk about it. The big aha for us was like, yeah, it's fun to look at all the colors in the chart of the MMM, but like, what about this base sales? Like, wouldn't it be cool if that was much larger? If the sales I would have gotten anyways was more? That seems like that's awesome from the perspective of like resilience and risk reduction and better forecasting and less reliance on third parties that I don't control. These all seem like good things. Why don't I focus on trying to build that? And we realized there was nothing out there that does that. So like, think of us as like, how do I build that resilient base? However you want to define it, right? If it's like brand search, revenue from brand search, or if it's not as simple, right? Because you got to remove all the spikes, you've got to adjust for spend and seasonality and blah, blah, blah. But like, how do I build that resilient base of revenue? How do I drive more people to search for my brand and buy, or just memorize my freaking URL and come and buy? Like, those are the purchase actions that I want to drive more of. And that comes from activating the 95%. When they become the 5%, sure, they're going to be more likely to click on my ads, which will make my performance more performant. But I also want them to just like not have to go through that thing. Let's play different games, like let's spend our dollars to drive brand search and revenue from brand search, that kind of stuff. So anyways, we're trying to, for modern brands, turn this, it's like incremental future growth. Think about it that way. Less brand. Brand's a scary word, right? But it's an important word and you got to stand by it, right? Because brand matters. But like from a performance marketing mindset, we're just trying to turn incremental future growth beyond what you would achieve if you were just continuing to spend in the way you are today. So brand, but into a performance marketing workflow where I get data today on what I did yesterday so that I can act and make decisions and basically run a full funnel ad account, basically across YouTube, Meta, TikTok, whatever.
Man, I love that. I 100% agree. Brand is moat at the end of the day. It's what you have. And I think brand shows up in the ability to charge the right prices so you can protect your profits. It's the ability to continue to grow and to have people searching for your brand. I know Mark Pritchard, the marketing director at P&G, always says like one of the greatest signs that we look for knowing that a brand has traction is brand search growing over time. That's something we need to measure. And I like this idea of resiliency, right? This baseline revenue, is that growing? And that's going to be an indicator of, am I doing things right? And I do think there's like this sense that brand is mushy and it's fluffy and you can't measure it and it's just, in the ether or whatever, but that's not really true, right? Brand can be measured. You just don't measure it in the same way, and you do kind of need a collection of tools. But I think this piece that you're solving of, how do we measure the resilient growth of our brand shows up with Chubbies, right? Like, would you say 8 years in a row, like the top bottom line growth or whatever?
Yeah.
Even in the midst of craziness.
Totally.
It's important. It's important to have that resilient growth. And so I guess maybe kind of as we wrap up here, like what are some of the insights that pop up? Do you have any examples of like with this data? These are the insights that pop up and then what we can do with those insights.
Yeah. So some of the data that has come to the surface, it's actually pretty interesting. So like the one point though that I would make is that sometimes people think about, like it seems too good to be true that you can measure this brand thing in like a performance marketing-ish way, or even measure the revenue impact of brand, right? The reality is that like P&G or Ford or these massive advertisers, they've worked with firms to build these custom models. They cost millions to build and to maintain, and they take a really long time to get all the data in, et cetera, which is why, we lowly $50-100 million brands, don't really do this, but they've been doing it for a long time. But they've just been these crazy complex models that were built by these analytics firms, and they took just a really long time. But it's proven methodology. They've been measuring this stuff for forever,
totally.
Right? How else? Like for us modern consumer brand builders to think that like all of the traditional multi-billion-dollar brands have just gotten there because they've been flying blind, they've had no data, right? Like, I think we need a little humility ourselves. Like these are very precise.
Absolutely.
But like, it's expensive
Absolutely.
to do it that way. So I think the thing that we're doing with Marathon,
not measurable. It's just not measurable in the way we're used to. And so that like
not in the way we're used to. And then like up until I guess what we're doing is like in not a way that we could afford.
Right. Right.
Because it would be very expensive to build these custom models. So like part of the thing that we're doing is like, let's try to generalize it. A lot of the people who built those super custom models for those big advertisers from these analytics firms are the ones who were like, this is how I would do it if I would democratize this for everyone. And so when we came together, it was like, oh, this is awesome. Let's figure this out. But some of the big things that have stood out, like one of the things we've always knocked on is whether or not a follow or a share is valuable, right? I think we've all gone through this, well, at least I have, like this hype cycle of like, that's all that matters. It's the worst thing. There's no value. Maybe it does matter. There's no value. Yep. So the reality though is somewhere in the middle. There's some value of someone taking an action, and that is an action. It is a precursor action. It's a non-shopping behavior, but there is a statistical relationship between people taking those actions and your future revenue.
Yep.
So if you can find that, so I think that's one of the big things. So like we think about then spending our money not to drive a purchase. So like now I'm talking about like non-purchase campaigns, which freaks people out, right? Because they're just like, why would I do a subscriber campaign? That is insane, like, does it have value? Blah, 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 blah. To get IG follows, to get TikTok follows, to get Facebook follows. Can you imagine getting a Facebook page like? But the reality is that these sorts of things are opening up additional reach, lowering the cost per 1,000 accounts reached, reaching different people, right? Because like, as you think about like, if you're the ad auction, right, you're going to serve media because you're going to get the highest bid on this set of people. It doesn't make sense to serve media to these people who haven't shown all these intent signals that they're in market. So they're not going to do it. So then when you choose different objectives, the bid is different because the auction's different. And you're reaching all these people that you weren't otherwise reaching. And if you use your best creative that our friend Jacques makes, or that any of these brands have made that has earned engagement, talks about who they are, what to do, you're doing the brand building thing in a performance market. Like you don't only have to do billboards and linear TV. You can do it in a performance market. Right? So we're getting people to take those actions because that's a lot of the playbook that we used at Chubbies to do this, right? It was very much like, let's build our community by distributing content that wouldn't crush it in a bottom funnel performance marketing ad set necessarily. It wouldn't beat the very like product offer urgency sort of thing that you got to do, not knocking that.
Yep.
So it's like different. Totally. So then I think like the key things are like run media differently, use different objectives, and it matters. Like it helps, it works kind of thing. And if you want to lower CPMs, you want to reach more people, right? Those are like the inarguable rules. But now we're like helping to provide a little bit more context on how valuable it is so that you can think about how much to budget think about like, what is the split for me, given my cash profile, given what I demand from an incremental ROAS on a 30-day rolling basis, whatever that might be. So that's kind of like what we're finding, but like finding that YouTube super valuable on a long-term context, right? Like pretty meaningfully. But then Facebook as well, right? I mean, just going out
Absolutely.
and like whether it be post engagement campaigns or like trying to get Facebook page likes. Yes, that action matters, but then it's also the fact that you're just reaching people you weren't otherwise reaching.
Right.
And then it's like, do I have the creative? Everyone has more brand building creative, whether it's amazing and freaking awesome, different conversation, but everyone's got to start somewhere. You know what I mean? And so we're kind of like helping you to like put numbers to your gut. Whereas you know that putting this piece of content in front of more people is just good. You know, that's who we are. That's what we do kind of thing. Now we're just kind of like validating that with numbers. And, but yeah, I mean, to your point, like brand search, not a perfect metric. Yes, it's tied to spend. Yes, if you spend more on DR, you will get more brand search. That's not the point. The point is that there are other ways to spend your dollars to more efficiently drive brand search.
Yes.
And to more efficiently then get those clicks to your site and more efficiently have them be high converting. That's more the point. What we learned at Chubbies is like, yeah, let's spend our money to drive brand search more efficiently. Like that's what I want to do. That's how I want to use the ad platforms, right? That puts me in a different bucket where I'm leveraging it to meet my needs. And so we're just trying to help brands. I don't want to say see the light because that's implying that they're blind or whatever, but just like free them up to do the things that'll help to like truly drive their business without seeing this mythical dip. I think that's the other thing. As people transition, they're like, am I going to go out of business while I'm transitioning? The reality is absolutely not. But it matters how you do it, right? It matters how you do it. And so we're trying to help people through that as well. But those are some just like quick takeaways.
Yeah, that's so important. And putting data behind your gut and your intuition. I trust and believe that if I invest in marketing in this way with a really strong brand message that compels people, but it's not the buy now, save 100% type of thing. It's like, it's a good brand message. I believe that's going to work. I'm going to trust it, but I'd sure like some data to back me up. And that's what you guys have built and what you're doing here. And it just makes sense, right? And we look at this all the time with YouTube and there's been such an influx of people coming to OMG for us to help them solve YouTube, which we do all the time. Mm-hmm. But hey, if we can reach the right audience, maybe for like a $5 or $8 CPM or a $10 CPM, and you're getting a $30 or $40 CPM somewhere else, that's going to have an impact, right? And if I can drive more branded search, which comes to me at 50 cents or whatever, that's going to be better than driving $7 clicks in some of these other areas. And so it's like understanding some of those things are powerful, but now you're putting some of the measurement behind it to see the real business impact of those things.
Yeah. And then just trying to, and then validating it with like straight up, like well-run, long-term geo-hold-out incrementality studies. So that when you get those results, I mean, it trains your MMM or your statistical model, but it also gives you data that you can take to the CEO and CFO and just be like, because the tough thing that always happens, right? And you probably deal with this with your clients. It's like, crap, October's soft, or September was rough. You got to cut all that stuff, right? Only bottom funnel. And then when you don't have like like any kind of like causal holdout data, there's no way for you to say we would be doing worse if we weren't doing this brand building stuff. There's no way to say that, but that's true, or it's potentially true. And if you're running these experiments constantly, like if you have this culture of experimentation, you can actually say that, right? Here's the data. Like, look at these geos doing way worse where we're not doing this demand gen stuff, or I don't want to say demand gen, like creating net new demand for our brand, let's call it. And so that's what we really encourage anyone who's doing any kind of, stuff that doesn't necessarily optimize for driving that short-term today purchase is like, just run experiments. And so that you can have that conversation where it's just like, no, because this is the whole goal, right? We want to make more money than we would had we just been sticking to bottom funnel demand capture. That's the goal. More profit dollars sustainably over many, many years. We're all aligned on that front, right? So like,
yes.
If we have some numbers in this like missing fluffy piece, that is the compounder, right? That's the end of the day. It's the compounder.
It's the compounder. Yes.
The bottom funnel demand capture, it is the thing that, cashes in on the compounding. But if you don't have a compounding, right? I mean, then we're in trouble. So we want to solve that.
You're in trouble, man. It's so good, so good. I could keep going on this like all day. I absolutely love this stuff, but we do need to wrap up, and we'll have to do another round in the future, and hopefully not wait a couple years. But who is Marathon Data right for? Like, what's your ICP or your ideal client profile, and how can people find out more?
Sure. So ICP, it's like, let's call them generally like modern consumer brands, right? Who have maybe reached a point where they're just like, like why? I think part of the reason maybe why we're not seeing the results we want to see is because maybe we haven't been able to invest in this brand stuff. Or like, I know brand is important, but I can't figure out how to invest in it or measure it. So there's like that little bit of pain, or I'm crushing it, but I don't know what I'm doing that's helping me crush it, right? What should I be doubling down on? What should I be cutting? Everything's seemingly working. What's what? There's those things. You're generally, spending a lot of money on Meta, Google, YouTube, TikTok. You've got active socials. You're trying to expand multi-channel, right? You started D2C. Now you're on Amazon. Now you're in Walmart or Nordstrom or whoever. And you don't have to be all of that stuff, but those are generally the folks that we work with. Maybe you need to be around for like 3-4 years, right? To have enough history. So all that stuff, but pretty much any consumer brand.
Love it. Love it. And then how can they find out more? Where can they get a demo? How can they dive in? That sort of thing.
Yeah. So you can just slide right into my DMs on LinkedIn. Just search Preston Rutherford with shorts in the middle of the first and last name. Or you can go to marathondataco.com or marathondataco, someone told me. That I think is a way better way to talk about it.
Marathondataco. That's perfect. You'll never forget that.
But hit me up on LinkedIn. Read some of the stuff that kind of like helps articulate these yammerings on the internet. But
Yep. Love it, man. Really appreciate the time. I'll double down on this. You're still one of the best follows on LinkedIn out there if you're in the marketing and brand building and consumer product building. And like, if you're in marketing, you got to follow Preston on LinkedIn. So just do that. Check out marathondataco.com or Dataco. I like that even better. And so, Preston, thanks, man. A ton of fun as always, and always great to catch up.
Pleasure, dude. Love what you're doing. And thanks for the opportunity. Hope this is helpful for the audience.
100%. And as always, thank you for tuning in. We'd love to hear from you. What would you like to hear more of on the show? If you found this episode helpful and you think it'd be helpful for someone else, please share it. And with that, until next time, thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by Wayflyer. You've got demand. You've got ads that are converting. But without enough inventory, you're leaving money on the table. And when your bank doesn't get D2C, they won't structure funding the way you need it. That's why thousands of D2C brands turn to Wayflyer. Fast, flexible funding designed just for e-commerce. No equity, no dilution, no hassle. Trusted by 5,000 plus brands and backed by JP Morgan, Wayflyer has deployed over $5 billion to help D2C brands go. Visit wayflyer.com/OMG commerce. Learn how Wayflyer can help you and discover how you could get a 5% rebate off of your fees.